Thank you all for joining us. For those of you who are new, I see a couple new faces. I'm Shane Barclay, and these chatter ups, we started doing them just to give everyone a chance to talk baseball and have a little lighthearted camaraderie during these crazy COVID times. So thank you all for joining us. I see we're at 35 and counting, and I'm expecting a bunch more. So, but we're going to get started now. We typically start with the NPB update, but sometimes it's hard for Michael to join us, being a weekday morning for him in Japan. He's not on yet, so we'll get to that at the end, which is good because it'll give us more time for the important stuff. So we'll skip that for right now. Just real quick, I wanted to share my screen with a couple shout outs here. So you can find us online, of course, at all these different places: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. If you're not on our mailing list, please get on our mailing list. I'd appreciate that. That's the only thing I ask for your participation here, is to be on the mailing list. And Andy is going to put that link in the chat for you all, so you can just click that and sign up. Our next chatter up is July 30th. It's going to be a game night, is what we're calling it. Some of these special guests are really fun, but I also don't want to get too far away from just having some interaction and having fun related to baseball. So we'll do some trivia, a scavenger hunt, and a few other things, and compete for some prizes on the next chatter up in a couple weeks. And then still haven't confirmed the date, but Emma Ryan Yamazaki is going to join us in August to talk about her documentary that many of you saw on ESPN about the Koshien summer high school tournament. So that should be a fun one. We'll have more announcements on guests in the future in the next chatter up, but for now, that's all I have. Real quick, you all have probably seen him so far, but I want to make sure you know who Andy Payden is. Hey, Andy. Andy's a producer on the show with us, so he's going to be monitoring the chat and probably going to be interrupting at some point. So just know that he's supposed to do that in case he interrupts us. All right, so that's all the announcements I had. I want to get to the main event here, which of course is Sandy Alderson is joining us. So I'm going to introduce Sandy and ask him some questions. I'm going to try to keep things mostly related to his international experience, at least for my questions. And if you have questions that relate to the conversation at hand, just put it in the chat that you want to participate, and Andy's going to get to it. So, just say, hey, I want to ask Sandy a question about X topic. And if we can incorporate it into the flow of things, well, then we'll just put you in the spotlight and we'll incorporate it into the conversation. If it's off topic or we miss you, Andy's just going to keep track of all of them, and we'll get to it at the end when we do just kind of a more open Q&A. You're also welcome to just put the question in the chat, and Andy will read it once again if it's kind of in the flow of things. If not, we'll just wait till the end to get to that. All right, so Sandy, I'm going to put you in the spotlight here for a second so everyone can see you. Hello, welcome. I'm just going to give an introduction here for those of you who don't know Sandy's breadth of experience. So most people know him for running the A's throughout the 80s and 90s, where he built 3 pennant winners and won the '89 World Series against the Giants. And then also known as the Mets GM from 2010 to 2018, where he took the franchise from a laughingstock in a financial scandal from the Madoffs into a World Series team. So for those efforts with the Mets, he was Sporting News Executive of the Year. But those GM accomplishments are hardly the only noticeable parts of Sandy's resume. And Sandy, bear with me. It's not my fault that you have done a lot of stuff. But
yeah, please keep it short, will you?
Yeah, I'll try to run through it. But I just want to make sure people get a full breath so we can have an interesting conversation. So military is a big part of his life growing up. His dad was a pilot. Sandy was in the Marine Corps. At Dartmouth, he was in ROTC and played baseball there. And then enlisted and served a tour of duty in Vietnam and was put on the leadership track in the Marine Corps, serving in various prestigious positions and units. But then he moved on to Harvard Law School, which led to him working with the group that eventually bought the A's from Charlie O. Finley. And he became the GM of the A's after that. And kind of one of the first non-baseball men, I guess, as you'd say, to run an MLB team. And they were at the forefront of the modern revolution. So you traditionalists can love them or hate them for it. But, you know, they were one of the first teams to use computers and employ the Bill James methods and whatnot. They were a lot of firsts, like first team with a weight room, with a mental skills coach. And I think as far as I know, when you hired Billy Beane to be the GM under you, you're the first team to kind of use that hierarchy with the president and GM that all the teams are doing nowadays. So Sandy groomed Billy Beane to replace him, then left for the commissioner's office where he was in charge of baseball operations, working with the umpires and improving the integrity of the umpiring in the major leagues and doing various international projects. We'll talk a lot more about those international projects later. Then he went to the Padres where he was CEO of the Padres. They won a couple NOS titles, but then the team was sold and the new guy made himself CEO. So Sandy moved on. And then he spent some time at Cal Berkeley teaching. And that led to the reason why we're here today with Sandy teaching while I was there. We'll talk more about that later as well. And then he moved on another stint at the commissioner's office to clean up things in the Dominican Republic before the Mets hired him, and was with the Mets till 2018. And now is an advisor with the A's, back with his old protege, Billy Beane. So was that quick enough for you, Sandy? It's not easy.
Appreciate it.
All right. I did the best I could. All right, so let's just jump right into it. When you first confirmed that you'd be willing to join us, I figured it'd be a good time to read Steve Ketten's book that I had on my shelf about you for a while. And I couldn't believe it. When I opened up the book, the first paragraph of the first chapter is talking about you being in Japan, living in Osaka, and your baseball experience there. So if I'm not mistaken, those are your first experiences playing baseball and watching baseball in Japan. Was that in Japan?
Yeah, so first of all, I'm very happy to be here tonight, guys. I hope we have some fun and looking forward to your questions. And virtually no topic off limits. So hopefully you can hear me and we'll have some fun. So my father was an Air Force pilot. He flew in World War II. He flew in Korea. And after Korea was transferred to a base in Japan. And at that time, my family came out from Denver, Colorado, and I lived in a place called Hamadera in Osaka for about a year and a half. First baseball experience, playing Little League was in Japan, but also playing against Japanese kids. And, this was sort of immediate post-war within 10 years or so, but they were great. We weren't as good. But the one memorable baseball event was a barnstorming tour by the Yankees in 1955. And my father took me to a game in Osaka, I believe it was in Osaka, between a Japanese all-star team and the Yankees. And what I remember from that game is only one thing. And it's ironic because Billy Martin was the manager of the A's much later when I was there, but Billy Martin was playing third base that day, and he was getting razzed by the crowd on the third base side, which is where we were sitting. And I remember him turning, finally getting so teed off at the crowd, he turned and yelled some things back. And at that very moment, at least in my memory, a Japanese player hit a line shot right past him. So it was one of those Billy Martin moments. But as I said, almost, I guess 40 years later or so, maybe not that long, 35 years later, Billy Martin was the manager of the A's at a time when ultimately I had to fire him. So it's a small world.
Wow. So you had a lot of Billy Martin moments throughout your life then, huh?
Well, Billy Martin was the manager of the A's when I got into baseball in 1980 and 81. And, I had come from the Marine Corps, so I was used to a sort of more disciplined, structured environment. And Billy Martin was just a wild man. And of course, being exposed to him for the first few months, I thought, well, gee, I guess this is just the way they do it in baseball. It's a completely different world. And as it turned out, and I realized over the next succeeding months, was that no, this isn't the way baseball is. This is the way Billy Martin is. And it was a turbulent year and a half. Billy was a great manager, but one of the things I like to talk about from time to time is leadership. And unfortunately, Billy was a tremendous professional manager, but his personal qualities always undermined him eventually. And really, to sustain leadership, you've got to have both professional expertise, acumen, and some personal qualities that support that professionalism. And unfortunately, the personal qualities often or eventually caught up with Billy. And now, on the other hand, I don't think he was happy in Oakland anyway. Wanted to go back to New York, and that worked out for him. So it was a great experience, but I think Billy was happier in New York than he was in Oakland.
So when you took over that team, Charlie Finley was the owner before. Was there an overlap there at all, or was it kind of a clean cut? Did you interact with him, or was there at least remnants of his ways that you had to deal with?
Well, Charlie ran a very tight ship. He had a very small front office. Really, very few personnel. And his support systems were not very sophisticated. For example, he used those 3 World Series trophies from the 70s as filing cabinets. You all know what the World Series trophy looks like. It's a semicircle of flags. And so he would put files between the flags. And that was part of his office filing system. We had the season ticket holder base was so small that all of the information on the season ticket holders was kept in a shoebox. So it was a pretty skinny operation. His nephew was in the front office. His name was Carl Finley, a great guy, and he provided a little bit of continuity. The only time I ever met Charlie was in Chicago at the closing of the sale. And Charlie was from he lived in, I think, LaPorte, Indiana. Had an insurance company back east, and the closing was held at the law offices of John Paul Stevens, who later was or by that time had become a Supreme Court justice. But I was a very young attorney at the time, 3 or 4 years experience, and Charlie was upset about the possibility the closing would take place too late for him to earn interest on his cash for one day, and threatened to blow up the whole deal if we didn't get the money from California to Illinois in time for him to earn interest, one day's interest. So, Charlie was a character, but that was the only time I ever met him. Never saw him while he had the A's, and never saw him afterward.
Got it. John Eames, who's on the call and is a Bay Area guy, he wants to know, I guess contrast that, how great was it to work with the Haas family at the A's?
Oh, the Haases were terrific people, from Walter, who was the head of the family, to Roy Eisenhart, his son-in-law, and then Wally Haas. Wally and I and Roy are still great friends. And there were 2 things that I think were important with the Haas family. One was they gave us the opportunity to try things and experiment. And this is why, you explained at the outset, we were the first to do this and the first to do that. They encouraged us to just try stuff. It's one of the reasons we got into analytics. It's certainly one of the reasons that we, had a weight room very early in baseball. So there were a lot of things that the mental skills coach, the idea was try it. Let's see if it works. If it doesn't work, we can change direction. But they had a tremendous willingness to allow us to try new things. The reason I got the job as GM was not because I had any extraordinary experience in baseball. I had zero, effectively. But I think Roy, who was running the team at the time, had more confidence in sort of my judgment than he had concern about my lack of experience. And so I'm forever grateful that he gave me the opportunity. I was working in a law firm and at the time said, hey, I can always be a lawyer if this doesn't work out. And fortunately didn't have to go back to practicing law, although I'm sure I'd have been sued for malpractice along the way sometime if I had. But anyway, that's how it got started.
Wow, that's a fascinating start. Going back to Japan, just we got off a little bit there. So you've seen baseball in Japan and the WBC and opening days and back when you were a kid. And even you mentioned you hosted the Japanese team at the first WBC in 2006 when you were with the Padres. So what's your overall impression of Japanese baseball, whether it's the players or the fans or the baseball culture in general?
Well, obviously, tremendously impressed with baseball in Japan. So I have been to Japan, as you mentioned. I've been there in connection with WBC qualifiers, MLB, opening series, all-star tours. As I said, I was there in 1955. But I've always been thoroughly impressed with Japanese baseball and their commitment to the game, and the commitment not only of the players, but also of the fans. When I was in Oakland, we partnered with Cebu for a period of time. But while I've got tremendous respect for Japanese baseball, and over the years, we've almost never signed a Japanese player directly from Japan. And that's partly because I've been with teams where we really didn't have the resources to compete, either scouting-wise or financially for those players. But, the commitment that the players have, the discipline that they have, the seriousness with which they take the game has always been very impressive.
Yeah, I agree with that. Segueing to some more international stuff with the Olympics. So, as we mentioned, a lot of people know that you're the GM of these successful MLB teams. Some people don't know that you're basically the GM of a gold medal team too.
Yes.
So what's the story with the 2000 Olympic team and your role there?
Well, that was a tremendous amount of fun, particularly in retrospect, given the fact that we won the gold medal, which is not the case. It wasn't as happy an involvement in 2004, but in 1998, I went to Major League Baseball to head up baseball operations, and one of my responsibilities was an emerging international competition involving Major League players, or at least Major League affiliated players. This was all leading to the 2000 Olympics, but the first qualifying event was in Canada in 1999. And so we had to qualify there in order to make the Olympics. Only 2 teams qualified out of the Western Hemisphere. And fortunately, we qualified with Cuba. It was kind of an uphill battle because in that Pan Am game, in Pan Am series, we lost to Canada the first day, which was a disaster, but ended up qualifying. What's interesting also about 1999 in the Pan Am Games is it's the first instance of drug testing for performance-enhancing drugs, to my knowledge, at the major league level. In order to participate in the Olympics and provide players, Major League Baseball had to agree to have its players tested. And so I think that was the first time organized steroid testing took place at the major league level. It was kind of sort of in the vanguard of testing, and eventually led to widespread testing in baseball. But anyway, we qualified for Sydney, and what I did was sort of organize committees of scouts to select the players, and then put the team together, and ultimately, and the staff and so forth. It was a lot of fun. We went to Sydney several times. Was there for the pre-Olympics training. We selected the final team. Played a number of really nerve-wracking games in Sydney. Blacktown actually is where most of the games were played outside of Sydney. And then, won the gold medal against Cuba in the final game. I can still remember where I was. Ben Sheets pitched that game, went on to be a very good, excellent major league pitcher. I couldn't take it, so I was walking around, and I was somewhere in the outfield, beyond the outfield fence when we got the final out. But it was a great experience. I compare it to winning the World Series, except in a very compressed time frame. But it was, and to this day, that group stays together. There's a book that's been written about that team. They're trying to make a movie about that team, but it was a great group because it involved future major league stars like Ben Sheets, but it also, involved some guys who that was the epitome of their career. That was the high point. We had a guy. There were a couple of guys from Oakland that were on the team. And it's interesting, the 99 team was more of a scouts team, and the 2000 team, the Olympic team itself, was more analytically selected, if you will, with a view toward, on-base percentage and power, and maybe sacrificing a little defense for offense. But there were a couple of guys, really unsung players at the time. One was Mike Neal, who played a big part in the entire Olympic series. Ernie Young was also instrumental. But there were just, if you go back and look at the 25-man roster, there's just a lot of guys that for whom this was the high point of their career, which made it a lot of fun. It was a great experience.
Wow, it sounds really fun. I imagine you didn't get a gold medal there, though, huh?
No. I got a uniform.
There we go.
Framed uniform, but no. In fact, Tommy Lasorda didn't get a gold medal. Only the players get gold medals. But Tommy got plenty out of it.
Yeah,
Tommy,
I'm sure.
He was a hoot too. He was. It was perfect for Tommy Lasorda at that time of his life because it was a short-term commitment. It wasn't 162 games, and he was way past that physically and mentally. But for this period of time, he could stay focused, and a lot of his BS went over really well over a very short period of time. I remember when we first got to Sydney, all the players moved into the Olympic Village, and Tommy said, "I'm going to move in with the players." He was a big rah-rah. Be with my players. And I think he lasted one day in the Olympic Village. The beds were too small. The food stunk. It was Tommy was back in the hotel within about 14 hours, I think. But anyway, it was a great experience, a lot of fun.
That's hilarious. That you I don't think you're reading the chat, but you just answered Scott's question. Wanted to ask about Tommy Lasorda, so thanks for addressing that.
I've got to add something to 2004. So we won the gold medal in 2000, and now we have to qualify again to play in 2004 in Athens, and so I was in charge of that team too. And we had a pretty good team, and we went down to Panama City to qualify in. Wasn't the Pan Am Games, but it was a qualifier for the Americas, and it was absolutely crazy down there. The first night, the fireworks display blew up and killed a person, almost killed Dave Stewart, who was our pitching coach. We got to the semifinals. Now we have to qualify, only 2 qualify. We got to the semifinals and we played Mexico. And we go to the 9th inning, tied, and in the top of the 9th, a Mexican player hit a home run off of one of our relievers. Now, one of the things about international baseball is every game is super critical. And obviously, when you're in a knockout round, that's clear. But every game is critical. Every inning is critical. And so our manager was kind of using his pitching staff as if it was the middle of a 162-game season. It was, hey, we're on the line here. So anyway, we get to the bottom of the 9th. We're down a run. We get the first 2 men on base, and we have we have 2 left-handed hitters on the bench, and the right-hander is pitching for Mexico is a sidearm, very tough on righties. Anyway, our manager bunts with nobody out, bunts him to second and third, never uses the second left-handed pinch hitter, and our 2 righties go down, and we lose 2-1. And I was so upset because it was it was an old school approach, and given my my preference for high on base and driving the ball, sacrifice bunts are not really in my lexicon. So anyway, that was a really and so we didn't get to go to the Olympics in 2004. Anyway, one of those things.
Wow, that's a heartbreaker. I'm going to ask one more Olympic question, then I'm going to go to some of our guests. But can you just speak a little bit about the importance of the Olympics to the game of baseball in general around the world?
Yeah, I'm a big believer in promoting international baseball. As part of being involved with the Olympics, I attended International Baseball Federation meetings in lots of places, promoting the game, trying to get the game played in lots of places where it's not popular. And the Olympics is absolutely critical to that effort. The Olympics provides 2 things. One, it provides a platform, an international platform that is unmatched. The World Baseball Classic is nothing compared to the Olympics. And so the platform is incredibly important. And partly that's because national governments who are, involved heavily in the Olympics for political reasons as well as others, they promote Olympic sports. If you're not an Olympic sport in China, you don't get promoted the same way as an Olympic sport would. And that includes not just, it includes finances as well as other resources and prominence in the media and so forth. The second thing is that if you're in the Olympics, the Olympic movement itself generates revenue through the Olympic Games, and that in turn finances the sport as well. So if the game is an Olympic sport, you would find probably, well, at one time, I think our high point, we probably had well over 100 national baseball federations, in crazy places. Now that number has probably shrunk quite significantly. I've always been beyond the Olympics. I've always tried to push baseball internationally, to invest internationally, particularly in places where we don't currently have a footprint. We have a small academy in China. It's ridiculous, the number of people who, that we support, ridiculously low number of people that we support to play baseball in China. We do nothing in a place like India. I mean, India ought to be a perfect location for the promotion of baseball. They play cricket, so the eye-hand coordination stuff they're totally familiar with. Many places they speak English, so the scouting and the development would be easier. And we don't really do anything in India. Where we do play, we do stuff in places like Australia, which from a overall strategic standpoint makes no sense, because there's nothing there. There's no market there. They like to play baseball as kind of a secondary sport. And it's great to go to Australia. In fact, I was involved with setting up the Australian Baseball Academy in connection with the Olympics. But there's no market there long term. I mean, there's a market, but it's very limited. If we're doing anything in Australia, it ought to be as a laboratory for developing applications in places like China and India and other places, even Europe as well. We don't have to be soccer in Europe. We don't have to be cricket in India, but we can be a very substantial alternative if we promote it. Max Kepler's from Germany. There's no reason why there can't be more players from Europe and other places, but we don't spend the money to develop those players or provide opportunities for them.
Yeah, I'd love to see some of that change. Bob Abels, kind of on that note, wants to ask, how well does MLB work with the World Baseball Softball Confederation, or formerly International Baseball Federation, to expand international baseball?
Well, MLB works very closely with USA Baseball, for example, in connection with a lot of the international tournaments in Sports USA Baseball. And USA Baseball it's under USA Baseball's aegis that MLB participates in things like the Olympics and other international events. But MLB basically controls and manages the players and resources, etc. MLB works well with international baseball, the International Baseball Federation, with one exception, and that is it won't even consider using major league players for these international events other than the World Baseball Classic. And I spent a lot of time trying to convince people that, look, it's important for baseball, MLB, to be in the Olympics. If we have to use major league players, let's figure out a creative way to do it. For example, can we reduce the competition time at the Olympics itself from 2.5 weeks to 4 days? There are lots of things that we could do to be creative to satisfy the Olympic movement, and recognize that, it's okay, baseball is a great institution, but so is the Olympics. So let's figure out how to do this in a way that benefits both. Now, you look at hockey these days and they're pulling out of the Olympics, et cetera. And I think in part it's because hockey feels they don't need the Olympics anymore, notwithstanding how many of their players from places like Sweden and Czechoslovakia and so forth would love to play for their home country. But I think the NHL's gotten to the point where they don't think they need the Olympics anymore. But baseball, if baseball wants to expand internationally, it needs the Olympics. And I even went so far as to try and appeal to the avarice of major league owners by saying, look, if we can make the game more popular around the world, we will create more capital resources and interest in your franchises. So if the commissioner says, well, you know, my goal is to make sure everybody's franchise appreciates in value. Well, my response was, well, one of the real ways we can do that is make baseball familiar to more people in more parts of the world. So that if there's some guy from Dubai who wants to buy a sports franchise, he just doesn't focus on the Premier League. He thinks about baseball. Or if somebody from, you know, some oligarch somewhere. Now, I'm not advocating that we, you know, sell all our franchises to the Russians, but the point was, how do I get their attention? And that was my last resort, you know, was, okay, you really want to drive the price of these franchises up? Let's start. We need to appeal to people from places other than the United States. Anyway.
That's an interesting point. I'm going to go to Andy here so he can highlight some other questions we have coming in.
Yes, we just got a couple questions in the chat. To keep it international baseball focused first, let's go over to Craig, who had a question about the minor league system in Japan.
All right, Craig, I'm going to put the spotlight on you.
Yeah, I was just curious about how I guess, I don't know if they even call them the minor leagues in Japan, how they compare to the US and how the university system in Japan is involved the way it is in the US. How do those compare?
You know, that's a very good question, and I don't think I'm qualified to answer. I think that our minor league system is more extensive, but in terms of, you know, quality and particularly how the university system contributes to the overall scope of professional baseball, I'm just not sure. I mean, one of the things that has happened in U.S. baseball is that the universities now are probably as cutting edge with respect to player development and technology as major league as major league clubs. In fact, in a lot of cases, more so. You're starting to see a lot of major league staff being hired out of colleges. And that's in part because a lot of the creativity, a lot of the innovation is coming out of those college programs and not from some of the major league teams. So unfortunately, our minor league system in the States is under assault right now. MLB wants to reduce the number of teams from about 160 down to about 120. Not because we need that many to develop players, but in large part because the minor leagues contribute to the major league brand in ways that go way beyond, you know, whether we develop a player out of Kingsport or, you know, Elizabethton or some other small town. So I'm sorry I can't answer the question. But our minor league system is definitely under assault, and I know that the Japanese system is more efficient in that regard, but in the United States, the minor league system does more than develop players. It also provides a presence, a Major League Baseball presence in a lot of places around the United States that develops not just players, but develops interest in the game and in Major League Baseball per se.
Okay, thank you, and thank all the people who answered in the chat also.
Yeah, I think some people on the chat here in our group are definitely have some thoughts. And Greg, we can talk about that more maybe at the end. Michael Westbay is on the call now when we do the NPB update. But I know that Michael and some other people have a lot of information about the Japanese minor leagues and how the college feeds into it and whatnot. But thanks for your question, Craig. I'm going to go back to Andy, who's got some more questions.
Yes, let's go over to Ian. He had a question a little bit ago. He's been waiting quite a bit.
All right, Ian. Going to you in your Simpsons living room.
So what was the impetus for using analytics in Oakland and sabermetrics? Was it Bill James or was it something else?
Well, it was it was a lack of alternatives on my part. So when I became general manager of the A's, and I think it was prior to the '84 season, I had a very limited background in baseball. I'd only been working for the A's for a couple of years. I'd never been involved in professional baseball before that. Never played baseball, even at the college level after my sophomore year in school. And yet I was in this position where I needed to be able to evaluate players. And you certainly can do that through surrogates, assistants and people like that. But ultimately you have to have sort of a decision-making structure of your own. And so about that time, Bill James was writing, but where I first became aware of analytics was driving to work one day and listening to public radio and listening to a fellow who we ultimately hired as a consultant, who had just written a book. And if you're really interested in esoteria, you can read something called The Sinister First Baseman. But it was a book written by Eric Walker, who was in the Bay Area at that time. We ended up hiring Eric as a consultant. We never publicized that, in part because my credibility in the game was so low. I didn't want to take it lower by announcing that we were using some crazy guy, mathematician, to help us make decisions. But so as a result, it was kind of like, well, how am I going to do this? And listening to him and reading Bill James, all of that made perfect sense to me. Now, the difference between analytics in the early 80s and analytics today is the extent of data that's available. If you go back to the early 80s, there really wasn't a lot of data to be analyzed. A lot of these Moneyball concepts at that time were concepts. They were ideas that made sense, but there wasn't, other than the sort of rudimentary mathematics, there wasn't a lot of technology or broad data that you could use to back up these concepts. But the basic idea of getting on base and driving the ball made a lot of sense. If you recall, in those days, some of you that are closer to my age, there was a manager with Baltimore by the name of Earl Weaver, who was a big get on base and hit home runs. He was a big 3-run homer guy, and they won a lot of games in Baltimore. There was another guy who was a manager at that time. His name was Gene Mauch, and he managed Philadelphia. He managed the Angels as late as, I'd say, 1986. He was a small ball guy, bunt him over, steal a base, sacrifice fly, yada, yada, yada. Mauch never won anything, and is kind of reviled in Philadelphia for losing like a 7 or 8 game lead at the end of the season with only 10 days to play. But Earl Weaver and that whole approach appealed to me, and it fit right in with the concept. So the next question was, okay, well, how are you going to apply this? And I would say the first incidence of applying this approach was when we drafted Mark McGwire in 1984. McGwire was a big home run hitter, had a high on base percentage at USC. Dropped to us in the 10th pick because he wouldn't make a deal with the Mets at number 1. And we took him over, some other very good players, more athletic, more traditional profiles. But he really fit what we were looking for. And if you get to the late 80s, the teams that we had in the 80s reflect that approach as well, in a couple of different respects. Just as an example, our center fielder was a guy named Dave Henderson. Well, Dave Henderson wasn't the best defensive center fielder in the game, but he was a good defensive center fielder, but he was also a guy that got on base and hit home runs. So there was this bias if you will, toward offense. Now, maybe that was because in those days, defense couldn't really be measured that well. And so what you can't measure, you can't improve, and maybe you undervalue. But if you look at those teams, that's kind of how they were developed. Ricky Henderson, great on base, leadoff man, great speed and so forth. But ultimately, even if you look at Ricky was a combination of speed and power as well, and more importantly, on base percentage. And I think those were the first few days when offense began to override defense at almost every position, including shortstop. If you go back and look at the Mark Belangers versus the Cal Ripken Juniors, you can see how, the Louis Aparicios have disappeared in favor of players who maybe aren't as exceptional defensively, but who bring a lot more offense to the table. And right now, you need a lot of offense to win baseball games at the major league level. But anyway, short answer is it was really the only approach available to me at the time.
Thanks, Ian, for that question. So it's interesting, like you had to kind of downplay, almost like hide the fact that you're working with a statistician, and you obviously had to blend like new school and old school from the very beginning for the reasons you just said. And now, for a while there is, that Moneyball came out 20 years later, and then the owners got behind it, and now everyone's kind of doing that model. And now, there's some talk about maybe the Ivy League model has gone too far in one direction. Do you feel that way?
Yes, I do. As a matter of fact, I've even thought about writing an article in connection with that idea. I think what's happened is that a couple of things, a couple of random thoughts. First of all, I think you're absolutely correct. Moneyball created a top-down revolution in the game. Owners read it, understood it, realized that baseball concepts were similar in many cases to other basic business principles with which they were familiar. There was an extension from those owners to the front offices. And as a result, what Moneyball, the book, did was kind of lay it all out. It's not like there was any great proprietary secret, but it kind of laid it all out and made total sense. It was an aha moment for a lot of these owners. Well, not surprisingly, over the years, what we've got now is we've got front offices that are basically extensions of ownership. And I don't think that's good for the game. I think there were sort of three constituencies in the game. One was the players, one was the owners, and there right smack in the middle was baseball operations people. And within that group of baseball operations people, I think there resided a sort of best interest of the game philosophy. Today, the front offices are just an extension of ownership. There's no ballast in the middle, that keeps us focused on the best interests of the game as opposed to the best interests for me personally or for my team. So that's one sort of ramification. Because everybody has bought into analytics, and this, you talk about Ivy League, we're not talking about, history majors. I was a history major. We're talking about economics majors, computer science majors. We're not talking about a cross-section, even in the Ivy League. And so what we have then is we have a very kind of monolithic approach to the game. Everybody sees it the same way. And so as a result, the game, I think, has become very one-dimensional. And my solution for that is we're not going to get smart people out of the game. That's kind of not going to happen. On the other hand, my solution is to change the rules and make everybody start from zero again. So because what we've done so far now with all of these, we've squeezed all of the uncertainty out of the game. One of my big targets is the shift. I hate the shift. The shift, to me, is a problem because it has created a more one-dimensional approach to the game. The idea that hitters are going to go the other way is nonsense, because the analytics tells you that even if they go the other way and get a single, it doesn't really help that much. I mean, it helps, but it's not the same as if you got a single to left with a man at first, 5 times out of 10, that doesn't overcome a home run 2 or 3 times out of 10. And so as a consequence, you know, it's nice to say, well, why don't they go the other way? They're not going the other way because the analytics tell them not to. And as a result, we have people going over the shift rather than the other way because it produces more runs. Forget about, you know, salaries. So one of my things is, let's get rid of the shift. And the second reason is it symbolically stiff arms the front office and says, okay, we're going to play the game on the field. And unfortunately, baseball has evolved rather than through greater analytics and greater efficiency. I talked to a front office person a few weeks ago, and I was kind of lamenting the fact that it's not as entertaining as it was before. We have basically one strategy. And so the unpredictability comes from the execution or the lack of execution. It doesn't come from an array of strategies that present themselves that you could choose from. No, there's only one strategy. So he said, well, don't blame me. My job is to solve every problem for 2 things. 1, efficiency, and secondly, probability. That's my job. My job is to solve every baseball problem in terms of efficiency and probability. And if you think about it that way, that's the reason why we're getting rid of some of the minor leagues. It's because it's the reason we have a one-dimensional strategic kind of approach in the game. And it's suffocating the game itself. Now, when I say change the rules, the only way that you're going to actually pump more life into the game is by changing the rules in such a way that you incentivize different strategies. Why? Because the different strategies offer the same level of probability of success. So you got to, for example, if you want more stolen bases in the game, you got to figure out a way to incentivize teams to steal bases. And one of the ways you're going to have to do that is to make it just as valuable to steal a base as it is to sit at first base and hope that the guy hits a home run. You have to change the incentives. So we've got a lot of smart people in the game. They're not going away. And so to challenge that sort of intellectual capital that each team has, we got to change the rules and make everybody start over again, and do it within reason. I'm not talking about changing stuff in a crazy way, but little things like you're going to see if we'd had a minor league season this year where a pitcher had to step off before he threw to first base. Little things that make it a little bit more likely to succeed in a stolen base, or to do this or to do that. Those are the kinds of things that we need to promote. I look at, I've been a big proponent of making the umpires more accountable and get the strike zone more consistent. But I have to tell you, I'm not sure about these robo umps, because that's one more area of uncertainty, which, okay, we want everything to be as perfect as it can be, but we need a little bit of room for mistakes. One of the things that I'm fortunate in the game, we don't see any arguments anymore between umpires and managers. I used to love those things. They're harmless, but they're part of the theater of the game. Well, we don't have any theater anymore. We've got instant replay, what have you. I've even proposed that you allow managers to argue balls and strikes. Why? Because it's fun. Come on, let's have a little controversy once in a while. I mean, if you think about Earl Weaver going up against Steve Palermo or somebody, those were great fun. The first manager we hired after Billy Martin left was a guy named Steve Boros in Oakland. He would never argue with an umpire. And he said, look, they're not going to change their minds, so why should I argue? I said, Steve, it's part of the theater of the game. You're doing it because the fans want to do it. Your players want to do it. You're representing all of them and their emotions. This is part of the game. We don't expect he's going to change his mind. That's missing the point completely. So Steve, go home, stand in front of a mirror, tell yourself you're going to argue with an umpire tomorrow, and it'll be fun. He never did, not once. So anyway, I get off my soapbox.
I hope you write that article. I can see the headline now. It's "I created a monster."
Yeah, something like that.
All right, I'm gonna go back to Andy to see. We'll go to some questions more from the audience here.
Yeah, so Carter had a question a little bit ago about the minor league baseball system. So let's go over to Carter Crum.
I got you, Carter. Hey, Carter.
What do you think of getting rid of the proposal of getting rid of all the minor league teams, or the 42 minor league teams, or whatever? And you certainly touched on it to a great degree.
Yeah, I think it's a bad idea. If you think about what eliminating those teams, those are all short season teams, probably save a team $700,000. That's pretty close to a major league minimum salary.
Yeah.
In the overall scheme of things, it's peanuts. I thought Kansas City's GM had a great point the other day. It's not just that these teams are in these small towns. It's the kids that never make it who have played professional baseball and go back to their hometowns and promote the game and coach little league teams or traveling teams. I mean, it's the way that the game gets propagated, and we're just eliminating lots of those opportunities. The second thing is, when you eliminate those teams, you eliminate much of the diversity that Major League Baseball hopes to provide. If you get beyond high school now, there's virtually no place anywhere to develop players. Colleges don't develop players. If you don't come in and aren't able to contribute, you don't get a scholarship to a college. The young players that maybe played basketball and football in high school and didn't play much baseball and are raw, quote unquote, or not as refined, those are the kids that get drafted, in the 10th to 20th round and get a chance to play and get a chance to develop. But if you eliminate 40 teams, which is the equivalent of 1,200 players, those kids aren't going to get a chance to develop. And the diversity that the sport needs and doesn't have at the moment will get even worse. The reason there are so many Latin players in the game, which is a great thing, but the reason there are so many Latin players is because we provide in the Dominican Republic, in academies that every team owns, an opportunity for 16-year-olds to play, and 17 and play at 16 and 17 and 18 and so forth. And these are exactly the players who are going to be eliminated in the United States if we get rid of those 40 teams. And it's a shame. But it goes back to the thing that I mentioned before. efficiency and probability. It's not efficient to have that extra team or two, because it's true. A lot of players, very few players come out of those groups. And it's not probable. It's not likely that anybody is going to come from those teams. So on an efficiency basis, let's save the money. And from a probability standpoint, we're not likely to get any players out of it anyway. But is that the end of the discussion? Shouldn't be. We're talking diversity. We're talking about branding. We're talking about, promoting and sustaining the game across the United States. Those 40 teams don't cost us, it's pennies on the dollar for what we get back.
That's an interesting point about the diversity part. I mean, there's so many different angles to this, but I hadn't even thought about that. It's really interesting because that is a big problem here. But let me go back to Andy. All right, Andy, who's next?
All right, let's go to Duff. He's been waiting a while.
All right, Duff. Hey, Duff.
Hey, a pod.
Gotta love him, right?
Yeah.
Basically, what was it like working with the Padres, especially under the Morris administration? I know things got pretty dicey when even Becky filed for divorce. What was it like working with the Padres, and was that the beginning of the end? Could you see the writing on the wall?
Well, let me answer your last question first. Not only didn't I see the writing on the wall, but I found out about the fact that the team had been sold and I was likely out of a job from a writer at the winter meetings in Las Vegas. But I got to say that being with the Padres was one of the most enjoyable periods of my career. I love San Diego. I love the people in that organization. I was the CEO, so I ran the baseball and business side. We had some great people there. I just loved the whole thing. And John Moores was a great owner. He didn't really meddle in things. And KT, Kevin Towers was there. We had a really good relationship. He's a great guy. San Diego was a terrific place. And we did a lot of things. We hosted the World Baseball Classic there. We won a couple of division titles, although we won one division title with 82 wins. So that's when the Dodgers weren't too good. But
and you got Petco Park.
Petco Park was a fantastic place to play. I was there just after it was open, and but I was there for to put up the Tony Gwynn statue. I selected the sculptor for that, and that turned out really terrific. Great monument to a great player.
Yeah, I've had my picture taken with that a few times.
Yeah, great spot.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thanks, Duff. We have a bunch more questions, but I wanted to make sure we touched on the DR a little bit because that's interesting to me. And I also wanted to use this opportunity to share with everyone, and probably some of this is news to you too, Sandy, but some of my story and kind of what led to us in a way being here today with you on. But so when I was in college in Berkeley, I took an extra semester there, mostly just because I really enjoyed it and I didn't want to graduate yet. And I was trying to figure out a way to work in baseball. I studied abroad in the DR, and I thought maybe that would help get me there. And I still wasn't quite sure how to parlay my education into a baseball career. So I signed up for the sports business class my last semester, my extra semester at Cal. And the teacher was supposed to be like a sports agent or something. He worked for an agency. And I thought, okay, well, this could be something. It's just a 2-unit class, but maybe it can help me out with a career. He could help me out a little bit and, figure out what I'm going to do to get a job. And then when I got my syllabus, they said the teacher is Sandy Alderson. And I was like, I was like, I think I know that name. And I had to look it up just to be sure. I was like, okay, wow, this is a huge opportunity here. So that little 2-unit elective class, I busted my ass. It quickly became the most important class I took in 4.5 years. And so that class was super fun, and I appreciated you just not making it about baseball. And I tried to make a decent impression without brown nosing too much. And then when we met, at the end of the year, I asked you for some advice on, how I could potentially get a job in baseball. And you suggested that I write a letter to all 30 teams, or maybe a couple letters, depending on who it was I was pinpointing in the front office. And you said you can kind of throw in there that you're in my class, and I suggested that you do this or something like that. And I'm not sure if I told you at the time, but I put your name in the first sentence of the letter. I said, said, I'm writing to you for the suggestion of Sandy Alderson. And that got me somewhere. People responded. So your name carried some weight, and that helped. And the Diamondbacks hired me to intern in the 2010 season. And right about then, you got hired, appointed by Commissioner Seelig to go clean up things in the DR. And so when I finished up the season, I kept in touch. We kept in touch, and I ended up being hired to work under you in the DR. And so I was really excited. I finally got my first full-time job, and it was like my former teacher, and I was going to have all this opportunity to learn under you. And so I was flying out to the DR, and I had basically an extended layover in New York for like a day to do orientation and whatnot. And then the HR folks told me that I was going to be on the plane with you the next morning to go down to the DR because there's some big meeting going on down there, like an industry meeting. So I was all gung-ho and everything, and I get into cab at 5 a.m. to go to JFK to get on our flight to Santo Domingo. And in the cabs, they have those news tablets, the screen. And so the scroll on the bottom of the news screen said Mets hire Sandy Alderson as general manager. And I was like, oh man, I hope this is just a rumor or something. So I got to the airport, and you were at the gate. You probably beat me by like 2 hours, knowing you or something, even though it was like a first flight out. But you were waiting there, and I said, so I saw some interesting news. And you said, yeah, well, that meeting is now going to be my goodbye meeting too. So I'm moving on. So my career of working for you for about 24 hours.
Sorry about that. Might have been to your benefit.
Well, it was tons of fun working down there, regardless of whether that part worked out. I enjoyed my 2 years down there, and it really was formative in a lot of ways, and professionally and personally, and kind of put me on the road to be here with JapanBall. But I'm curious about like your experience in the DR. Maybe you could share a little bit about what you did down there, and then just some takeaways on the Dominican baseball culture that you have.
Well, I first went to the Dominican Republic in, I think it was 1983. We ended up hiring Juan Marichal, Hall of Famer, as our scout in the Dominican. But I spent many trips down to the Dominican in the 80s. We eventually put in an academy there, which I think was the second academy. The Dodgers had the first one. We may have had the second. Toronto also was well established down there even before we were. So I had spent a lot of time down there, enjoyed being there, enjoyed the idea of scouting in the Dominican. Not that I consider myself a scout, but I enjoyed the chase. And, at that time, it was very different because there wasn't the amount of information available on players that there is today. I mean, you could actually find players in small towns in those days. Today, the Buscón system is so widespread that and proficient that there are no real surprises in places like the Dominican Republic, or even to some extent Venezuela, although travel there is more difficult. So when I left the Padres, I agreed to do a study for MLB, a white paper on the issues that existed in the Dominican Republic and Latin America generally. And when I ended up, they were looking for somebody to take over the office down there to implement some of the recommendations that I had made. I sort of volunteered. It wasn't exactly a job that a lot of people wanted to take. My attitude has always been, I'll do anything once. And I kind of like the idea of taking on jobs that other people don't find attractive or what have you, but, can be important. So I went down there, and, the goal was, in a general sense, to kind of clean up the Major League Baseball image in the Dominican Republic, and make us, MLB, a better corporate international citizen, if you will. Part of the problem was Dominican-based, age manipulation, steroid use, things of that nature. But also, a lot of the corruption was supplemented by people from major league organizations. I mean, there was a guy who went to prison, a guy named Dave Wilder, taking money out of the Dominican, cash out of the Dominican in his socks or something. So it wasn't just a Dominican or Venezuelan problem. When I went down there, most people feared that I was there to impose a draft. And so there was a lot of pushback from the baseball community there initially. And it was only after a period of time that I made it clear I wasn't there to eliminate the system, but rather to improve it. And we did that, by instituting identity investigations, more testing for drug use and so forth, but also attempting to create better work environments for the players, higher standards for academies. I even had a crazy idea, not crazy, but to my knowledge hasn't been totally implemented, about ways we could incorporate education into the Buscón system. So the idea was to recognize that the Buscóns there provided a definite service in terms of developing players, but we had to figure out a way to incentivize them to do it the right way, rather than through subterfuge and other manipulations and illegal means. And I really loved it down there. I thought it was a lot of fun. We had a small office. You'll remember that our office there was in a house, a small house in a neighborhood. I really enjoyed the camaraderie that we had there, and I think we got everything headed in the right direction. One of the problems with the system in the Dominican baseball system is it does take young kids away from the educational system. Now, the educational system in the Dominican is terrible anyway. But one of my ideas was to try to incentivize the Buscóns to provide more education to their young kids. And the idea was to impose an academic achievement test as part of the registration process. So you'd have to register, you do a identity investigation, which you have to do in order to get a visa to the United States anyway. You test for test for drugs, and you do an academic achievement test. And the theory was that kids that did better on the academic achievement test would get higher bonuses. And I think that's one of the reasons Venezuelans typically get higher bonuses than Dominicans. It's in part because the educational systems are better. Kids are more adaptable culturally, etc. So the idea was give them an academic achievement test. And that would then force the Buscóns to actually provide some education, as at the same time that they were trying to develop the players' skill levels. So that really hasn't been fully implemented, but it was an idea that probably if I'd stayed there longer, I could have followed through on. But I enjoyed it down there. I think like the first week I was there, it was like 1,000-person demonstration against my presence there, because they thought I was going to bring the draft with me, but I tried to disabuse him of that idea. By the way, we have exactly the same kind of system in the United States. It's called it's the showcases, it's the tours, not the like JapanBall, but these travel teams. Travel teams are just like Buscones. And what baseball has to figure out a way to do in the United States is work with these travel team groups if we want to diversify the player pool, et cetera. And I hope that's something we'll do over the next few years. So got an idea for that, but that's for another day.
Yeah, well, I can say that a lot of the stuff you put in place in the DR, we kept doing for many years after. So it definitely was productive. Bob Abels has a question, a related question, talking about Cuba a little bit. So Bob, I'm just going to let you answer that or ask that one.
Okay. Yeah. When I retired from work, I did a lot of international travel, and I went to places like saw Series del Caribe and World Cups, and I did run across a lot of these Cuban recruiters, and in my discussions with them, they seemed all very shady, and I said, I don't want to hang around with these guys, but I don't know what your thought is on the whole Cuban recruitment process and whether that has some concerns on your part. So.
Yeah, it's a very good question. You know, the question of how Cuban players get to the United States is a really complex one. And human trafficking is probably not a bad umbrella term for what takes place. And, you know, in a lot of cases, baseball teams are complicit. When I was in the Dominican, I had to suspend and fine a couple of executives who misidentified two Cuban players as Dominicans in order to sign them. That was their attempt to get around various limitations on even scouting Cuban players. Some people have gone to jail for the human trafficking, and I think they deserve the jail. I think that, you know, MLB tried to work something out with the Cuban government, and I think did work something out. President Trump reversed that. So Cubans still have difficulty getting out of the country by conventional means. But there are a lot of, you know, almost apocryphal stories about people like Cespedes and a whole host of other Cuban players getting out of the country. I should mention that I was the MLB person responsible for, responsible at Major League Baseball for the Baltimore series with Cuba, the game in Havana and the game later in Baltimore. And that was in 1999, I believe, and was a fascinating experience dealing with the U.S. government, which didn't really agree within itself from department to department over, you know, whether these games should even be played. Dealing with the Cuban government and all the restrictions on resources going into Cuba and remaining in Cuba. It was a fascinating experience that culminated with a dinner with Castro, and I, you know, sat across the table like two down from Castro, and it was interesting because all Castro wanted to talk about were the baseball academies in the Dominican Republic and whether, you know, Cuba could duplicate that success. But it was a fascinating thing, and you know, I look at Castro just as a historical figure, putting aside all the negatives, and to some extent maybe positives from some perspectives. But it was a fascinating period of time that included, bugs in our hotel room, satchels full of cash. it was quite an experience. But Cuba is fascinating. And on the other hand, if you talk about Cuban players, honestly, my general impression is they're overrated.
Great.
They are definitely overrated. And I've seen this a few places. I was reading an article in Baseball America today, and it went back to, I forget what year it was, with a kid named Glenn Williams, who was signed out of Australia. He was the highest paid international signee that year. And he came from Australia. And it was symptomatic of, there are certain places, there's a premium. So we all think Cubans are great, and they're great baseball players, and they must be worth all this money. And some of them turned out very well, but a lot of them have been awful. And the amount of money spent on these guys has been extraordinary for the return. And, I was mentioning Australia. For some reason, there was a premium on these guys coming from Australia once, not anymore, but there was this fascination that existed with Cuba, but also in other stranger places like Australia.
Thank you. Yeah, ask the Dodgers how much money they spent on Cubans.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, amazing.
They twigged, but they, everything else they spent went down the drain. So, and I look at some players that we have in Oakland right now. They're not Cuban players. They're not doing very well either. And I don't know what it is. I think there may be something sociological also, that they just don't adapt that well to the culture in the United States. I don't know what it is. Why it's different there coming from there than it might be from some other place in Latin America. I don't know. I'm not a scientist.
That's interesting. And Michael points out that some of them have done well in Japan, surprisingly. They have a higher hit rate in Japan, but it's also a different process of getting over. They're going to Japan like with an agreement with the governments and all that. But
yeah,
we have you for 5 more minutes, so I'm going to jump to a couple more questions here. Gabe's got his hand raised. If anyone else wants to sneak one in, just raise your hand on the participants button, and hopefully we'll sneak you in. But Gabe, going to you.
Thanks, Shane. Hello, Sandy. My question's around Canada's role, admittedly being a little selfish currently in Toronto. I know that we used to have more minor league teams than we do right now. Right now, that's only just the Vancouver Canadians. In the past, we've had, the Ottawa Lynx, the Calgary Cannons, the Edmonton Trappers. There's no AAA teams in the country anymore, and I wonder if that only having just the Jays is deadening the appetite for growing the game, or if there is room to grow. What do you think?
Well, preface my comments by saying that we in Oakland were in Edmonton for several years and actually won a PCL championship up in Edmonton. They built a real nice ballpark with an artificial surface, so it was a nice place to play. I think that the biggest issue, there might be a couple of issues. One is historic and may have to do with the exchange rate, which isn't a significant issue today, but at the time when, the league reconfigured, probably was an issue, just as it was an issue when hockey expanded so heavily into the United States. I think the second issue is just distance. The Pacific Coast League teams fly from place to place, but distance nonetheless does have an impact. I think the other thing is that honestly, there were probably cities in the United States who were prepared to subsidize these franchises in the form of new ballparks. And as a result, those teams relocated. Minor league owners, they make a little bit of money during the year, operationally, but ultimately where the big money is made in minor league investments is taking a team and figuring out a way to get a new stadium someplace, and then selling that team based on the public subsidy. And I think that may have something to do with it as well. But if you look at minor league baseball, the International League extends as far north as Buffalo, but no further. Now, and the Eastern League probably doesn't get quite as far north, although I do remember when I was with the Mets.
I think it's in New Hampshire. The Jays affiliates in Manchester, memory serves.
Yeah, that's right. So the Eastern League does get into New Hampshire. There was actually an effort made to purchase the Binghamton franchise in New York and move it to Ottawa, which didn't work out, again because of stadium issues. So I think there was this migration south, in part because of economics related to the exchange rate and related to what some cities were prepared to do to subsidize AAA clubs, and there just hasn't been any expansion, so there aren't any new teams, and I just think that the way things are currently, there's probably no momentum to get teams back to Canada, in part because teams like to have minor league franchises that are close to their major league location. When I was with the Mets, we were in Las Vegas for a couple of years, which wasn't exactly convenient.
I think the Jays had the Las Vegas affiliate just after or just before the Mets did.
Well, we were in Buffalo, and Toronto took
that
our
was
spot.
the switch. Yeah.
But the other problem that you have in places like Edmonton is just getting players in and out of there. So even though we were in Vegas, we had plenty of flights between Vegas and New York. That's a problem in Fresno. It's hard there's no direct flights out of a place like Fresno. And then Edmonton was also complicated. Places like that are just a little bit far flung for the average major league team to feel comfortable about getting players back and forth. Anyway, that's my guess. Exchange rate probably had an impact at the time when they all moved south.
Judging by the early 2000s timeframe, I'd agree. Thanks, Sandy.
Okay.
Sandy, I got to sneak in one more. Toshiki, I'm going to go to you next. Toshiki is he played college baseball in the U.S. He's Japanese, and he's a double major in multiple analytics-related things. So if the A's are looking for someone, and he might be your guy, but that's your plug, Toshiki. But ask your question.
Thank you. Hi, Sandy. Great to meet you. Thank you for being here. Just a little quick question. I would love to know if you have any idea about the next breakthrough in baseball, like you did with Moneyball. Especially when everybody's doing the same thing, data analytics, and which is what I'm studying right now. But I'd love to know if I can get a head start on, just going into the baseball industry.
Well, let me tell you what I've told a lot of people. I participate. I'm on the board of something called the Major League Baseball Players Alumni Association, and one of the things that we do is we put on career summits every year, so that former players can come and talk about career transition and so forth. And a lot of them want to get into coaching. And one of the things that I've told them is that they need to, one of the most important qualities that anybody can have, but particularly a baseball player now that wants to get into coaching or scouting, is curiosity. You have to be curious about the things you don't know. And a lot of people will just say, hey, I'm a former player and I want to coach the game. Well, in today's game, those who are successful coaching aren't always the ones who are successful playing. The ones that are successful coaching are the ones that bring that experience together with a lot of other expertise to bear when it comes to actually developing players. And, you know, we could talk about communication skills and so forth. But one of the things I tell these former players is I had a player development director in the room, in the auditorium. So I asked him, I said, look, if I were a former player and I wrote you a letter saying I was interested in coaching, I told you that I had spent 2 weeks learning Rapsodo, and I'd spent another 2 weeks in Seattle at Driveline, and I am very knowledgeable about the use of high-speed cameras, et cetera, et cetera. So I asked the development director, would you call me? Would that distinguish me from all the other candidates? He said, you bet. You'd get a call back right away. Because if you notice what's happening, even at the major league level, a lot of coaches are being hired out of colleges. Well, that's because some of the colleges and university programs are more sophisticated than the ones that major league teams have.
Right.
I was talking to a coach at Wake Forest in connection with the draft. They have a pitching lab there. They got all the bells and whistles. Now, the key is, and this gets back to your question about the next big thing. To me, it's not so much about ideas as about execution. So it's not the next new idea. It's execution on all of the existing ideas. And one of the reasons I say that is because new ideas are not new very long. So what happened, because, and a lot of these developments are taking place outside the framework of Major League Baseball. A lot of the interesting research that's being done is not being done by teams. It's being done by others who publish that in Baseball Reference or Baseball Prospectus or, you know, some other publication. And the other thing about new ideas is they become ubiquitous almost overnight. They're not, it's hard to, and I'll give you an example. It's hard to keep anything that secret that creates, you know, a competitive advantage in terms of an idea. It's all about execution. Execution of these. So if we're talking about high-speed cameras, if we're talking about anything, analytics is not as objective, right, as everybody says they are. Why? Because when people put together a system, an analytical system, they're making subjective judgments about the weight of certain factors, whether certain factors are going to be taken into account, the quality of the data predicated on that is a predicate for the analysis. These things are not as objective as they're portrayed to be because they require subjective inputs. Well, to me, execution is the most important thing. So it's easy to say we've got high-speed cameras, we got Rapsodo, we got all, you know, we got weighted balls, we got blah, 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 blah. Okay, what are you doing with them? How do you put it all together in a way that enhances the development of the player? Just because you have the technology or you understand the technology doesn't mean that you can bring it to bear in the development of player. So to me, the teams that are really good right now have created systems within their organizations that take full advantage of the resources that are available. You know, if you just say, well, we're gonna buy this system of cameras, okay, what are you gonna do with them? So it's great to have, you know, background in technology. It's great to have background in analytics, but the most important thing is figuring out a way to bring those things to bear in the development process or in the, you know, in the coaching process. And the teams that distinguish themselves and are successful are the teams that execute well. One of the things we didn't have with the Mets is what I'd call like a systems director, somebody who was responsible for putting all of these systems into play in a way that they enhance player development. As you can have a TrackMan or something with each affiliate, but if the coaches don't know how to use it or they're not comfortable with it, it's useless.
Right.
So I'm a big believer on, okay, it's great. We want to search out for the next big idea, but the bottom line is we got to do well. We got to do better than anyone else what we're all trying to do. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That kind of reminds me of Sandy, when you had Billy Bean in our class and someone asked a similar type question of what's next. And he said, he didn't necessarily use the word execution, but he's implying that by saying the thing that I want to know on the revolution of analytics is how do we keep our guys healthy? Because we can run 10 million simulations, but as soon as the guy gets hurt, all the simulations get thrown out the window.
Right. Yep. And that is a next horizon. The problem is that the human, and maybe this is what creates the unpredictability. It's more than anything else, it's health, physical health, mental health. It's going to be interesting, for example, in connection with these 60 games that MLB is going to play starting next week. And that is who responds well from the hiatus, both physically and mentally. There are going to be players that break down because they didn't spend a lot of time working out, or maybe they spent too much time working out during that 4-month hiatus. There are people whose mental acuity and mental perspective is not going to be sharp from the get-go. And over 60 games, it's a whole different, you can't just kind of work your way into it. I was talking with Billy the other day, and we were talking about, we got like 3 candidates to play second base. This is just a sort of a manifestation of the same problem. So, okay, we're going to let a guy play 20 games and see how he does? Oh, no, the season's a third over if we do that. So it's going to be real interesting to see how individuals and teams, respond to these changed circumstances, because it's a whole different thing. That mental game. Just how people respond to being tested all the time, or having to maintain 6 feet of distance. People are going to react different ways. It's going to be fascinating to watch, just from a sociological, experimental standpoint.
Totally. I'm glad you touched on that, because I was wanting to get to that, but a little bit about the short season. But we're well past the timeline here, so I'm just gonna thank you now for joining us. That was super enlightening and entertaining. I think I speak for all of us, and I think we're really lucky to have you on. So I really appreciate you taking the time.
I had a great time. I'm sorry I spoke so long, but I'm still hoping at some point to find out more about the Japanese minor league system and how universities contribute to baseball in Japan. So maybe that's another day for me.
All right, well, I'll give you the green light to sign off, but for everyone else, we'll stick around for a little bit just in case people want to chat about anything. And Michael, will go to you to hear about the NPB update. And if you do want to hear about it, Sandy, I'm sure we'll talk about it. But thank you very much for joining us, and I hope to see you down the road.
All right, take care. All righty.
Thank you. All right. Hey, Michael, are you still with us, Michael?
Yes, I'm still here.
Yeah, there you are. Hey, Michael, how you doing?
I'm doing pretty well, and you?
Doing well. I think it worked out well to have you talk to us a little bit at the end here, since Sandy had a lot to say, and
Yeah,
so
it was
yeah,
very interesting talk.
yeah, he's just a trove of knowledge and experience and information. So yeah, that was really cool. But Michael, what do you got for us with the last week in NPB, big picture wise?
Not really much other than fans are now allowed back into the stadiums. One of the major changes that I've noticed watching and listening to the games on TV is that when it first started, there really wasn't much sound. It was very similar to how it was without anybody in the stadium at first. But at least at Koshien, the fans started getting loud about the second and third day. And now I can really start to hear the fans starting to get back into it. It's still kind of quiet in Kyocera Dome, but then the Buffaloes hadn't had a good week this week.
Yeah.
Nagoya Dome also, these really big domes, even with 5,000 people, still seem empty. But everything is still a go-ahead for half capacity starting August 1st. And this is despite a spike in Tokyo infections. They went over 200 a couple weeks ago. They got it back down to double digits, and then it went back up again. So we still have a little bit of an issue with infection rates, but it has still been fairly well maintained. Hopefully that continues, and we'll see more people at stadiums starting August 1st.
Totally. Trevor, I want to hear from you about your experience. Trevor, what was it like going to a game?
Yeah, it was pretty cool. Like getting in and stuff was not so, like, there was nothing notably different other than the fact that you have to pass through and have your temperature checked. But even then they say don't stop, like just keep walking. You just have to kind of look into the camera and then you go through. There were still beer girls. There was still, the concession stands were still open. I think the idea was with 5,000 people there and, people sitting a solid 3-4 seats away from each other. There wasn't really the issue of like having to coordinate lineups, like so people are standing X number of feet apart because there just weren't that many people at any given shop. So yeah, it was pretty cool just to be there. And again, like it was limited to 5,000, but I felt like when the Tigers scored, it sounded almost the same as, with 45,000 there. So it was quite loud. And the only thing that was really like underwhelming was the 7th inning. There's no balloon launches anymore.
Yeah, they did towels. They have towels with balloons on them that they all hold up.
Yeah, and the towels look really cool. And actually, like there was a promo video with a couple of the Tigers players kind of using them to the sound of the song that they play, and it looked really cool and enticing. And they sell pretty cheap. They're only like 550 yen. But like just watching it it's not really visually appealing, nor is it like sonically appealing, nor is it anything. So it's just like, okay.
Was it my imagination, or did they not have sound on the speakers of the balloon shoot?
Oh, they didn't have the balloon sounds. Yeah.
I thought that I heard the balloon sounds, but without any balloons. So I thought that they were playing that over this loudspeaker.
I don't know. They might have. But I didn't really hear it.
It might have been my imagination. I don't know. That's when the balloon sounds come. So I just heard it anyway.
Right. Well, okay. So Gabe is saying that he heard it too, and so maybe I'm just blocking that out and I don't remember it. Maybe it did happen. But I was just kind of, I guess, so disappointed just looking around. And I was like, well, this is not exciting by any way you look at it. So, yeah, it was. What else can I share about the experience? Like it was great.
Purchasing beer from the beer girls, they now have a system where you put the money into a clear envelope, and then they take it out, and then they put the change back in the clear envelope. I saw this one of the cameras was concentrating on the beer girls selling beer, and it was kind of like when you go to the convenience store now, they'll always put the change in the tray and they always accept the money from the tray. They used to just go ahead and take it directly in their hands, but now it has to have that one extra step, the exchange of cash, basically.
Well, so yeah, Gabe said borrow Rakuten system, and actually they do have like a, you know, it's a card pay system or whatever. Like you can pay with your smartphone using PayPay or whatever. And at the risk of losing a ton of popularity with the JapanBall crew, I did not pay any attention to the beer girls, so I didn't see the exchange of funds or of beer, because I don't drink beer, and so I was watching the game too much, I guess, so I didn't really notice that.
Trevor, this is very very vital information here, Trevor. You got to give a thorough report next time.
I know, right? I'm really sorry. I was going, selfishly, not thinking that I was representing an entire, set of fans or anything like that. So my apologies for that. And by the way, can I just kind of plug this vest that I'm wearing? Somebody somebody sent me a private message, but so I got this vest, which just looks like a regular like Hanshin Tigers, pullover vest, but actually it's fully motorized with a couple of fans, and so it inflates.
What?
Yeah, and so I've got two fans in the back. Let me just turn around here a little bit. You see it there? It's like two fans.
It's air conditioning.
Yeah, it is. It is. And so when I go to the park, I look like I weigh like an extra 20 or 30 pounds because I'm all puffy. But it is an incredible toy I've got here.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I'm pretty happy about that.
Wow.
And as far as I know, like the guy who made it part of his line of products, he only has licensing for Hanshin Tigers ones. And they come in this home, kind of pinstripe style one. They come in this subtle but ugly road uniform style, and it doesn't have the big Tigers logo on the back. So his reasoning is like, you could wear it if you were just like walking your dog or whatever, and it doesn't really look that tacky. Whereas like if I wore this out on the town, I'd get a lot of strange looks, right? And then they also have a kind of pink one for the ladies as well. So it comes in 3 different colors, and then if you just buy the fan set once, you can actually like transfer it into a different vest at any time or whatever. So
wow, maybe we need some JapanBall inflatable vests.
I've got the guy's contact. I can put him in touch with you. And, see if you want to get it done, it can be done.
Hey, for everyone on here, I know it's getting late, especially in the East Coast, so you're welcome to sign off. And thank you all for joining us, and hopefully I'll see you in a couple of weeks for the game night. It should be pretty fun. So yeah, thanks again for joining. I was really fascinated by a lot of the stuff today, and hopefully you all were too. And once again, of course, if you're not on our mailing list, please sign up for it. You can just sign up, or we'll put it in the chat. But that's all I got for tonight. I'll stick around for just a couple minutes, but thank you all for joining. Really appreciate it. See you around.